welcome to PW English YouTube channel. I'm Shalini Somashekar, your botany teacher. I welcome you to this lecture in the UMEED NEET English batch. In today's class, we're going to be discussing the last chapter in your syllabus, which is biodiversity and conservation in one shot. So before we get started, let's quickly go through the number of questions that have been asked from this chapter over the last few years in NEET. So you can see how the range varies between 1 and 5. It's between 1 and 5. There have been many years where just one question has been asked, and a couple of years 2 questions have been asked. There are years where 3 questions and 4 questions have been asked. In the last year, there were 5 questions that were asked from this chapter. So looking at the number of questions that have appeared over the last few years, you can expect like around 2 to 3 questions, in my opinion, from this chapter. All right. And about whether you should refer the old NCERT textbook or the new one for this chapter, either of them will work. After rationalization, nothing has changed here. So whichever one you have, you can study with that. So let's get started. What is the name of the chapter? Biodiversity and conservation. Let's first understand what biodiversity means. Bio means life, living organisms. Diversity is a general English word which means variety, right? We say in India there is unity in diversity. You're aware of that. Diversity means variety. What that basically means is, though there are so many different varieties of cultures, people, languages across India, we all remain united in that context. So with respect to biology, what would biodiversity mean? Diversity is variety, bio is life. The variety that you see in living organisms is what is biodiversity. Variety refers to how many different types of species are there, how many different types of ecosystems are there, how many different types of genetic variations are there. All of this contributes to biodiversity. For example, apparently on our planet there are more than 20,000 species of ants alone. Just ants, there are 20,000 different types, different species. Talking about beetles, which are another type of insects, you have around 3 lakh species of beetles present. And then there are about 28,000 species of fishes and roughly around 20,000 species of orchids, which is a type of flowering plant. So with just 4 groups of organisms, we have so much variety. So imagine about all of the insects, all of the different types of flowering plants, and just blows your mind to think about how much diversity exists on our planet. In this chapter, we're going to learn, explore about numbers. There's a lot of data, and how is the biodiversity distributed? Is it uniform throughout the world? Is there any gradient? Is there, any specific pattern it follows? We'll learn about that, and we will learn about how species are going extinct. What can you do about it? How will it affect you if some species somewhere gets extinct? And why should we conserve it? How do we conserve it? All of that. Okay. So let's get started. The enormous variety of life that is present on Earth is what we call biodiversity. I've already told you that. Now, there is this person, an ecologist called Edward O. Wilson. He is referred to as the father of biodiversity. He is the person to have popularized the term biodiversity by using it a lot. Okay. Now, according to him, you know how in the previous class and even in the first chapter of ecology, I've told you about different levels of biological organization. We start with macromolecules, then cells and tissues, and organs, organism, population, community, ecosystem, biome, biosphere. These are the different levels. In every level, diversity exists, variety exists. Talk about biomolecules, there are different types, right? You have proteins, carbohydrates, lipids, nucleic acids, there is variety there. Talk about cells, in cells there is variety. Talk about tissues, there's variety in tissues. There's parenchyma, collenchyma, sclerenchyma, different types. Organs, there is difference, right? There is variety. You have root, stem, leaves. Organism, there is difference. Population, there is difference. Community, there is difference. Not difference, more like variety. If you look at the diversity that is present in every level of biological organization, all of that can be considered as biodiversity. Okay, so what he says is, he used the term biodiversity to describe the combined diversity that exists at all the levels of biological organization. Of them, some of them are more important and some of them are more extensively studied. we are going to study 3 such levels of diversity in living organisms. The first one is called genetic diversity. Genetic diversity is the diversity that exists within the same species. Think of us humans, for example. We all belong to the same species, right? But still there is difference and variety among us with respect to a lot of characters. It could be the skin color, it could be how tall we could grow, it could be the color of your eyes, it could be the texture of your hair. With respect to a lot of characters, we are different from each other and variety exists. Now, what do you think is the reason for this variety? Why am I brown? Why is my hair black? Why are my eyes dark brown? Why is my hair wavy? Why am I the way I am? That is because of the kind of genes that are present in me. I have more genes that produce melanin, so I'm browner in color. One of y'all could have fewer genes and could be paler than me. One of y'all could be have more genes than me and be slightly more darker. So why we are the way we are, why diversity exists among us is because of the kind of genes that we have. That is why we call it genetic diversity, okay? This is at the species level. A single species might show high diversity at the genetic level over its distributional range. In your textbooks, there are 3 examples given. Firstly, there's this plant called Rauwolfia vomitoria, which you can find near the Himalayas. In this plant, a chemical is produced that is called reserpine. This reserpine has medicinal properties, so it's used as a drug. Okay. Similar to how the content of melanin will vary from one person to another, from one human to another, the amount and concentration of reserpine that one Rauwolfia plant produces will vary with the concentration another plant produces. And why is that? That is because of the kind of genes these plants have. Not just the concentration, even the potency of the drug could vary from one plant to another plant, even though they both belong to the same species. Same thing for rice. Apparently, there's greater than 50,000 strains of rice and around 1,000 varieties of mangoes. You know about the different varieties of mangoes, right? I'm sure you can name at least 5 of them because it's the national fruit and it's grown very well in India, and we are all aware of at least 5 varieties of mangoes. There's Alfonso, there's Badami, there's Raspuri, there's Totapuri, and there are so many different types. So all of these are different varieties belonging to the same species. They're different from each other because of the kind of genes that they have. That's why we call it genetic diversity. Now, the second type of diversity that we're going to learn is called species diversity. So this is diversity at the species level. Previously, what we saw was within the species level. Over here, it is at the species level. The example that we have here is the number of amphibian species is more in the Western Ghats compared to Eastern Ghats. Here you have the map, like half map of India. Over here to the left, to my left, you have Western Ghats, and to the right you have Eastern Ghats. What do we mean when I say the amphibian species is greater in Western Ghats compared to Eastern Ghats? Now let's take, for example, in the Western Ghats, we have, in the Western Ghats, we have 5 different types of species of amphibians. Let's call them A, B, C, D, E. Let's say A, there's 150 of them. B, there's 20 of them. 3, there's 15. C, there is 300. E, there is, let's say 72. Okay, random numbers I've written. What I mean to say is, in the Western Ghats, how many different types of species do we have? We have 5 different types of species. Just roughly, hypothetically, one random number I'm giving you to make you understand it's not like Western Ghats has only 5 species, okay? And in Eastern Ghats, you have just 3 species, let's say. You have, let's call them P, Q, and R. There's 3,000 of P, there's 2,500 of Q, and there's 12,000 of R. Now, if you look at these numbers, you know that clearly the number of amphibians here is more than the number of amphibians here. But when we're talking about the species diversity, we're specifically focusing on how many different species are there. Over here, you have 5 different species, but the total number of amphibians is less. Over here, you have 3 different species, but the total number of amphibians is much higher. When we are talking about species diversity, we don't care how many amphibians are present. The population size of amphibians, we are not bothered. All we care about is how many different types are there, how much variety is there. It's all right if there are 10 different species and probably 10 of them each in each species. Whenever the number of species is more, we say the species diversity in that particular area is higher. Okay? Keeping that in mind, in Western Ghats, we find more variety of amphibians compared to the Eastern Ghats. The number may or may not be more. I'm giving you this example not to say that in Eastern Ghats there is more number of frogs. What I'm trying to tell you here is to differentiate that we are not looking at the individual count, we are not looking at the population size of each species, we are looking at the number of species only. That is our prime focus. Alright, so here since you have more species, we say that amphibian species diversity is higher in the Western Ghats compared to the Eastern Ghats. Now let's move on and talk about ecological diversity. Ecological diversity is at the ecosystem level. What is an ecosystem? We've learned it in the previous chapter. An entire chapter was dedicated to ecosystem. We know that ecosystem is a geographical area and we include biotic, abiotic components, and we study the interactions that are taking place between them, and there are many different types of ecosystems. Now, ecological diversity depends on how many different types of ecosystems are present. Now let's compare two countries, one tropical country like India and one Scandinavian country like Norway, which is towards the temperate regions, much far away from the equator. So when you compare these two types of ecosystems, these two countries, the number of types of ecosystems that you find in India are much higher. So in India, you find desert, you find oceans like the coastal region, and then you have tropical forests, you have alpine forest, you have freshwater ecosystems, estuaries, so many different types of ecosystems. But in a Scandinavian country like Norway, you don't have that many types of ecosystems. You probably will not find oceans there. You probably will not find deserts there. And it's mostly temperate forests and alpine forests that you can find there. So the number of different types of ecosystem is more in India compared to Norway. So we can say that India is ecologically more diverse than Norway. All right. Now, how much biodiversity can we see in our world? Like, can we put like a number and tell like these many species exist on our planet? There are organizations like IUCN, which is International Union for Conservation of Nature and Natural Resources. They maintain the data of how many of a species have been identified, named, and described so far. According to their 2004 data, like 20 years ago, NCERT has not updated, like data, according to data from 20 years ago, right now the number of species that have been discovered and described is crossed 2 million. But according to the 2004 data, which NCERT has decided to stick with, there are roughly around 1.4 million species, which includes plants and animals, that have been described so far. How many more are there? Of course, every species that is there on this planet, we've not identified, described, and discovered, right? How many more could be there? There are so many different ecologists giving so many different types of estimates. Some of them say it could be like 30 million, some of them say it could be 50 million, and a lot of estimates have been put out for how many species exist on this planet. Okay, but there is a scientific way of doing it. How do they do it? See, if this is our planet, let's say this is our planet Earth. At the center of the Earth, we have the equator. Right on either sides of the equator, we have the tropical regions, and then we have the temperate regions, and then we have the polar regions, right? So here you have equator, you have, okay, wait, let's shade this. This is your tropics. whatever is in pink, this is the temperate regions, and then here towards the poles, of course, we have the polar regions. Now, there is something called a species inventory that is maintained, okay. In this species inventory, there will be a list of all the species that have been discovered and described, okay. Now, in the temperate regions, the species inventory is more or less completed. Almost complete for most taxonomic groups. Whereas in the tropics, the species inventory is kind of incomplete, not as complete as the temperate. Now, what do I mean by that? In temperate regions, whatever different types of species are there, most of them have been discovered and described and maintained. In the tropic regions, that has not been done for most taxonomic groups. Now, when I say taxonomic groups, I mean insects, birds, vascular plants, those kind of groups. All right? Excuse me. I'm feeling like I might sneeze, but I may not sneeze also. Okay, it's gone. Yeah. So what we do is, we take just one taxonomic group, okay. Let's say we consider insects. You consider insects, one group of insects, one type of insect you consider, extensively discover and describe those species and complete the species inventory almost as much as possible for that just one taxonomic group, both in the temperate and tropics. You know, in the tropics, the species diversity will always be higher than the temperate regions. Why? I'll tell you later. Just know that in the tropics, there'll be more number of species compared to the temperate, okay. For this one group of insects, let's complete the species inventory for both tropics and temperates. From that data, you will get to know that if in the tropics, if in the temperate region, there is X number of species, in the tropics, there could be 5x. If you find 1000 different species of insects of this particular group in the temperate regions, you probably find 5000 such species in the tropics. Alright, so from this you get a ratio of how much more diversity is there in the tropics compared to the temperate region. Now apply the same ratio to the other groups. I told you that more or less for all taxonomic groups, the species inventory is complete in the temperate regions. So what do we do then? We want to find out how many species of amphibians are probably present in the tropics. For the temperate, amphibian is complete, right? Let's say in the temperate regions, amphibians, probably there is 300 species. So approximately you can estimate that in the tropics, probably 5 times that, 1500 species could exist. Using this ratio, you can find out how many species are present in the tropics, like a rough estimate, even though the species inventory is not fully complete. So that is how you scientifically estimate how many species are yet to be discovered and how many species are present on this earth. One such scientific estimate was made by a person called Robert May, and according to him, the species diversity overall in the world, global species diversity is about 7 million, not 1.7, 7 million. All right, now let's talk about global species diversity. In the world, there are many different species. of them, of the ones that have been identified and described so far, 70% of them, more than 70% in fact, are animals, and nearly 22% of them are plants. So there is more species of animals compared to plants. Over here I'm not again talking about how many animals are there, how many plants are there. I'm talking about variety, I'm talking about species diversity. How many different species of animals are there, how many different species of plants are there. If you're considering the types of species, then the species diversity of animals is higher. Around, of all the species that have been described so far, plant, animal, fungi, around 70% or a little more than 70% is animal species, and nearly 22% is plants, and that includes fungi also. Okay, it includes bryophytes, pteridophytes, algae, angiosperms, gymnosperms, fungi, and all of those groups. Okay, now among animals globally, how is the species diversity? The most species rich taxonomic group is insects. Among all animal species, 70% of animals are insects only. So if you count, if you check how many species are present, in 10, 7 of them will be insect species only. Okay, and the remaining less than 30%, that is all of the remaining animal species. Now, if you consider specifically invertebrates, among invertebrates, of course, insects are the most species rich taxonomic group. After insects, you have crustaceans, after insects, you have mollusks, and after mollusks, you will have crustaceans, and then you have the other invertebrate taxonomic groups. You know, you've learnt invertebrates in animal kingdom, right? You know, from porifera to echinodermata, everything, all of those things are invertebrates. All of those taxonomic groups are invertebrates. When you're considering them, among them, within arthropoda, insecta or insects are the most taxonomic rich, most species rich taxonomic group. And then you have mollusks, and then crustaceans, which is again belonging to arthropoda, and then you have all of the other remaining groups. Okay, now talking about vertebrates specifically, in vertebrates, fishes are the most species rich taxonomic group. After fishes, you have birds, then reptiles, then amphibians, and then mammals. Okay, mammals are the least species rich taxonomic group. Fishes are the highest species rich taxonomic group. So remember FBRAM, FBRAM. Fishes first, then birds, then reptiles, then amphibians, then mammals. Okay, that is the order. Now that's about the global species diversity. Let's understand what is, that was for animals. Now let's understand what is the global species diversity for plants. In plants, over here in this chapter, we are including fungi also, but in biological classification, we've studied how it belongs to an entirely different kingdom. Over here, fungi is also considered within plant group only. So you know currently angiosperms are the most dominant and the most advanced type of plants, and that is the most species rich taxonomic group as well. Fungi and angiosperms pretty much have the same level of species diversity, and then you have the other groups, algae, lichens, mosses, ferns and its allies, all of those. Okay, now I've been telling you about species diversity. And I mentioned plants, animals and fungi, but I did not give you any numbers for prokaryotes. We do not have, we haven't included prokaryotes or bacteria in all of these calculations and estimations for two important reasons. There are no estimates that we have provided for prokaryotes. Firstly, whatever conventional taxonomic methods we use for describing and identifying other groups like animals and plants and fungi, it cannot be used, it will not be suitable for prokaryotes. Like for example, if there is a bacterium which is an obligate parasite, it will be difficult to cultivate. There are some organisms that could cause deadly diseases and you can't, it's not safe to culture them. Also, sometimes what happens is they grow in extremes of habitats, extremes of climatic conditions which we cannot replicate in a lab. So because of these reasons, we have not estimated the number of prokaryotes. And also, yeah, like I mentioned, it's not possible to culture all species of prokaryotes inside the lab. But if you start, including the prokaryotes, the number of prokaryotes itself will run into several millions, because there are so many different species of bacteria, right? Now, we'll talk about the contribution of India in biodiversity. You know, India is a tropical country. It has a very, very, very rich biodiversity. The land that India occupies in the world is just 2.4%. If you consider the land mass on Earth, India occupies just 2.4% of land area in the world. But its contribution to biodiversity is a staggering 8.1%. Though it is occupying just a very small piece of land, it contributes to a crazy high level of biodiversity. 8.1% of the world's biodiversity is contributed because of India. Because of its high level of species richness, India is declared as one of the 12 mega biodiversity countries of the world. There are 12 countries that are, declared as the mega biodiversity countries. Of those 12, India is also one. Talking about how many plant species you can find in India, nearly 45,000 species of plants you can find in India, twice as much animals, roughly around 90,000 species of animals can be found in India. And if you apply Robert May's estimate over here, Robert May said, according to IUCN 2004 data, 1.5 million species have been described, and he said roughly 7 million species exist on this planet. Apply the same estimate here. 45,000 species of plants have been described so far. Probably 1 lakh species or more than that is waiting to be described. Roughly around 90,000 species of animals have been described so far. Probably there is 3 lakh around species of animals present just in our country. That is how crazy high the level of biodiversity is on our country or in our country. Okay. Now let's understand patterns of biodiversity. So I've been telling you that India is ecologically more diverse than Norway. I gave you this example, right? What does that indicate? It indicates that ecological diversity is more in India compared to Norway, and ecological diversity is not uniform throughout the world, right? And also what is true is species diversity is not uniform throughout the world. Is there any specific pattern that you can find here? Yes, there is. We call it the latitudinal gradient. What basically happens is, as you move away from the equator towards the poles, it could be the North Pole or the South Pole, the species diversity is going to go on decrease progressively. Alright, so at the equator is where you will have the maximum species diversity. And as you move towards the poles, it will decrease. It is highest at the equator, and you can see a progressive decrease as you move away from the equator towards the polar regions. Okay. Now, let's take an example for that. Let's consider Colombia. Colombia is a country that is very close to the equator. It is present in the tropics. I told you what tropics are, right? Tropics are the regions that are present adjacent to the equator, around the equator, very close to the equator. So Colombia, being a country near the equator, is in the tropics. It has, we are comparing the number of bird species here. It has 1400 species of birds. Now let's consider our own country, which is India. It is in the northern hemisphere, like towards the southern part of the northern hemisphere, quite close to the equator, and it's also part of the tropics, right? So India also is a tropical country, and in India we have 1200 species of birds. Now move slightly ahead from the equator, from India towards New York, which is a state in the United States of America. It belongs to the temperate region. And over there you can see how there is a drastic decrease in the number of bird species. There's just 105 of them. Move even farther away from the equator, go to Greenland, which is in the Arctic region towards the poles, and there you have only 56 species of birds. So this shows how progressively there is a decrease in species diversity as you move from the equator towards the poles, right? Now, I'll give you another example. If you consider vascular plants, the species diversity in vascular plants. Which are the vascular plants? It includes your pteridophytes, gymnosperms and angiosperms. If you consider two regions of similar size, one in Ecuador, which is a tropical country, like the equator passes through it, one is Ecuador and the other one is in some part of Midwest of USA. These are two areas you're considering, two regions. One is in the like at the equator, the other one is farther away from the equator in the temperate region. If you consider how many species of vascular plants you can find, there will be at least 10 times more species of vascular plants found in Ecuador compared to the Midwest of USA. You see how that is also a drastic difference, right? There is a forest called Amazon rainforest in Brazil, South America. That is the place, that is the forest where you find the highest amount of biodiversity. That is also present in the tropics. In the Amazon rainforest, there are more than 40,000 species of plants, around 427 mammals, 1,300 species of birds, 378 species of reptiles, 427 again species of mammals, around 3,000 species of fishes, and greater than 1,25,000 species of invertebrates. And apparently it's believed that in the Amazon rainforest, at least 2 million insect species are not yet discovered and are waiting to be discovered. That's how species diverse the Amazon rainforest is. Now let's talk about what is the reason for this gradient to exist in terms of biodiversity. Why is it that there are more species in the tropics compared to the temperate regions? First reason is speciation is a function of time. Now, for more number of species to form, speciation has to occur, right? Speciation, you've learnt about it in evolution chapter. Speciation is the process by which a new species is arising from a pre-existing species. For species diversity more, if more species have to be there, more species should have newly formed by a process called speciation. And speciation does not happen in a short period of time. We didn't evolve to become modern humans from Homo habilis or Homo erectus over a short period of time. It didn't happen overnight. It didn't happen over a period of 10,000 years. It took several thousands of years to happen. So speciation, addition of more species into a region, consumes time. Okay. What has happened in the temperate regions is very frequently glaciations have occurred. You've watched the movie Ice Age, I suppose. So you know that very frequently glaciations have taken place in the tropics. Now what happens is, because of glaciation, whatever existing species are there, they also could have gone extinct. They would have gotten wiped out of the planet. And also, because there is a disturbance because of glaciation, there is not sufficient time available for newer species to form. But if you compare temperate with tropics, in tropics we haven't faced such glaciations much. So relatively we have gotten more time to evolve and more species to form. As a result of that, in the tropics you can find more species diversity. Okay, so frequent glaciations in temperate areas, many species were killed, and also in the tropical region diversification occurred because of stable conditions. So species continue to evolve and flourish, and new species formed over a long period of time. What is the second reason here? The second reason is the how seasonal the two regions are, the tropics and the temperate regions. In all parts of the world, you will experience different seasons, but the changes between two seasons are not too drastic in tropical countries as compared to temperate countries. In some temperate countries towards the poles, you can see how the day length varies, the temperature varies extremely. Like there are some countries in the world which experience sunlight for 6 months straight and complete darkness for the next 6 months. So in such cases, when very frequently seasons are changing drastically, the species will not get time to evolve. They will not find their niche. Niche specialization will not take place. Now, what is niche specialization? Let's assume there are two students. One of them is practicing art every day. He's painting and drawing and getting better at art because he's practicing every single day. There's another student who does art on one day and the next day he goes to a guitar class. On day 3, he goes for a skating class. On day 4, he goes for a swimming class. On day 5, he's back to painting again. And he does this. After a period of 1 year, If you notice who is a better artist, who draws better, who paints better, it's more likely that the first student is better because he's got more practice on it. So he's gotten specialized in that field. Same thing happens here. Just when the organisms are like, okay, there's too much sunlight right now, let me adapt to it. Just after a few months, there is complete darkness. And then while they're trying to adapt to that darkness, there's bright light again. So there is no constant environment in such places. Therefore, specialization, niche specialization becomes difficult. Since such conditions are not there in tropical regions, of course, we have seasons, but the variation is not too drastic. Therefore, organisms that are thriving here get more time for niche specialization and they will diversify. Alright? So, relatively more constant and predictable. They promote niche specialization, greater species diversity in the tropics. Now, final point is solar energy. Of course, maximum sunlight is received by the tropics and it progressively decreases as you move towards the pole. Sunlight is very important for an ecosystem. We know why from our previous class. I've told you that sunlight is a very important factor for photosynthesis to take place. Photosynthesis, how well it happens, determines the productivity. So the productivity, if of an ecosystem is more, then it can harbor more number of species. It can support more number of species. Since tropics receive more sunlight, there is more productivity in the tropics. As a result, more species can be supported in the tropics compared to the temperate regions. Alright, now that's about the reasons for why tropics are more species diverse compared to the temperate regions. Now let's understand something called the species area relationship. There is this German naturalist called Alexander von Humboldt. He explored many jungles and forests in South America. So what he basically noticed was, as he increased the area explored, the number of species would also increase. Okay, let's consider, for example, flowering plants. Okay, so let's start with our house. Okay, we are counting how many species of plants are there. We are increasing the area gradually and seeing how the species also will increase. So in my house, I have only one plant, that is a tulsi plant. So the species diversity in my house alone is 1. Now let's consider my whole building, my whole apartment complex. There are many houses. I know some houses have rose plants, some houses have hibiscus, some of them have dodpatri, I don't know what it's called in English. Some of them have a jade plant, some of them have a money plant. So if you consider the whole building, then the number of species is going to increase. Include my entire road, the street that I live in. There are avenue trees, there's a gulmohar, there is a, what do you call it? Pongemia tree, there is a coconut tree, there is a neem tree, there is a calotropis plant. The number of species that I encountered has increased. Now consider my whole locality. The number of species is further going to increase. Now consider my whole city, Bangalore. It's even going to increase. Consider Karnataka, it's going to increase. Consider the whole of India, it's going to increase. So as you increase the area explored, the species richness is going to also increase, but not indefinitely, only up to a limit. Okay, as you move on and explore more and more areas, what will happen? You will not get newer species. The species would have been already recorded earlier. You're not getting newer and newer species added to your list. Okay, so then eventually up to a limit it will increase. Now if you plot this on a graph having area on the x-axis and species richness on the y-axis, what we get as a result is a rectangular hyperbola. By convention, the rectangular hyperbola is represented by the equation S is equal to Ca to the power of Z, where S stands for species richness, C stands for the y-intercept, A is area, Z is the slope. Okay. Now, if you plot the same thing on a logarithmic scale, you're going to get log S is equal to log C plus Z log A. As you can see, this is like a linear equation. Y is equal to mx plus C, right? So, Z here, you know, M is the slope. So, Z here is represented as the slope. Now, if there is too many species that you are encountering, too many new species you're encountering every time you increase the area explored, then you're going to get like a steep curve, right? This line is going to be steep. If it's not very steep, that means the Z value is less. If it's very steep, that means the Z value or the slope value is more. Now, generally, regardless of which region you consider, regardless of which taxonomic group you consider, generally ecologists have studied that for most areas, for most taxonomic groups, the value of Z will lie between 0.1 and 0.2. Okay, it could be plants that you're considering in Britain, it could be birds in California, it could be mussels, fresh mollusks in New York, it could be whatever, it could be amphibians in India, it could be any organism, any part of the world. Most cases, the range is going to be 0.1 to 0.2. But if you consider like huge geographical areas like continents, if you want to find out how many fruit-eating bird species are there in continents as big as Asia, Europe, then in that case, of course, the Z value will be much higher, more steeper. It could range between 0.6 to 1.2. For example, the fruit-eating birds and mammals in the tropical forests of different continents, the slope is found to be around 1.15, which is much higher than the normal range. Okay, so that is species area relationship. Now let's talk about why is species diversity important for an ecosystem? Why should there be more number of species? What is its advantage to an ecosystem? If the species is more, biodiversity is more, then the stability of the ecosystem also will be high. Ecosystem is more stable when there is more number of species. How can you say that an ecosystem is stable? You're comparing two ecosystems. How can you say one is more stable than the other? What are the characteristics that will define which ecosystem is stable? Like for example, a good teacher is a teacher who knows the subject well, who can deliver it properly, and then who probably has like a neat board work and patient and listens to students. These are traits of a good teacher. Traits of a good student: somebody who has focus, who has no distractions, and he has his eyes set on his goal. He will follow everything that the teacher says to the T, and then he is disciplined. These are good qualities of a student. Like that, what are the qualities of a stable ecosystem? When we say an ecosystem is stable, what we basically mean is in that ecosystem, year to year, productivity variation will not happen much. Like previous year, net primary productivity was X amount, and this year it shouldn't be like too much of a deviation from that. When the productivity is not varying too much year after year, you can like say it is a stable community or a stable ecosystem. Secondly, whenever there is occasional disturbance, either natural or man-made, there could be a forest fire, there could be a flood, there could be a drought, there could be alien species invasion. In these cases, the ecosystem will be more stable, it will not get affected, it will be self-sustainable. So, such things will not bother the ecosystem, it will be resistant to all of these things. Then we say that the ecosystem is stable. It is noticed that ecosystems' productivity doesn't vary much. Even if there are occasional disturbances or alien species invading, the ecosystem will still manage to sustain itself whenever the biodiversity is higher. Okay, so how do we know about this? We know about this from David Tillman's experiments. David Tillman conducted extensive experiments in outdoor plots. He like took different areas, he considered different ecosystems with the same area, and then one of them would have more biodiversity, the other one would have less biodiversity. He just noticed year after year, is the productivity varying too much? Occasionally, if there is any disturbance, which one is able to handle it better? And eventually he concluded that the ones with more species were more stable. Okay, so he performed experiments using outdoor plots. He found that whenever more species were present in an ecosystem, less year-to-year variation in productivity was seen, and more diversity contributed to even more productivity in that ecosystem. Okay, now you might think there are so many different species, there's 7 million of them, okay, 500 of them getting extinct, how is it going to affect my life? If there are 3 lakh and beetle species, then okay, 10 of them going extinct, how is it going to matter to my life? These are some things that you might be thinking about. To help you understand how every species is so important to keep the balance in nature, there's a beautiful analogy given by Paul Ehrlich. Paul Ehrlich very well, like geniusly compares an aeroplane with an ecosystem. Okay? Just like you have so many different parts in an aeroplane coming together, put together with the helps of nuts, screws and bolts, which he calls rivets, in an ecosystem you have many different species that are helping it function together. So what is the comparison? He's comparing an airplane with an ecosystem. The rivets that are keeping the airplane together with the species that are keeping the ecosystem as a functioning unit. Now let's say every passenger that travels in the airplane pops up one rivet and takes it home with him or her. Okay? We will compare that popping of rivets to species going extinct in an ecosystem. Okay, this is called the rivet popper hypothesis because people are popping off rivets from the airplane. So let's say initially when people are popping off rivets from under the chair, under the seat, or probably from above or somewhere not so important, the stability of the plane may not be compromised, or the safety of the plane may not be compromised. Likewise, if one species out of 7 million, two of them go extinct, it may not initially affect the stability of the ecosystem that much. What is most important here is which species is going extinct, which part of the plane, from which part of the plane rivets are being popped off. If it's from under your chair, probably the people sitting on that seat eventually might be at risk, but overall plane safety isn't damaged that much, isn't compromised that much. Imagine somebody pops off rivets people are going to pop off rivets from the plane, from the wings of the plane which connects it to the body. Then what is going to happen? If such important rivets are popped off from the plane, then the overall safety of the plane itself will be compromised. Likewise, there are certain very important species present in an ecosystem which we call the keystone species. Like for example, honeybees. Honeybees or bees are keystone species because they bring about pollination in so many different types of plants. If they go extinct, the plants that were getting pollinated by them also could go extinct, right? So in that way, which species gets extinct also will matter. Eventually, with time, more and more rivets are getting popped off. The safety of the plane will definitely be compromised. Likewise, even in an ecosystem, the more and more species go extinct, the stability of the ecosystem also will go down. Okay, so over here he compares airplane with an ecosystem, rivets with species, popping of rivets with species going extinct, flight safety with the proper functioning and stability of the ecosystem, rivets on wings which are very essential and important, play a key role. He compares that with keystone species that drive major functions in the ecosystem. All right. I hope that has cleared any confusion that you may have had. Now, why are we talking about this so much? That's because in the last few years, we're seeing a lot of extinctions happening on our planet. According to IUCN's Red List, I told you what IUCN is in the beginning, International Union for Conservation of Nature and Natural Resources. They maintain a book called the Red Data Book or the Red List. Okay, they maintain that data. According to their 2004 data, 338 vertebrates, 87 plants, 359 invertebrate species have become extinct in the last 500 years alone. If you have to name some very recent extinctions that have happened, it is the dodo, the bird from Mauritius, stellar sea cow, a huge animal in Russia, quagga, which looks partly like donkey, partly like zebra in Africa, thylacine in Australia, Caspian tiger, Java tiger, Bali tiger. These three subspecies of tigers have gone extinct very recently. In the last 20 years alone, 27 species have gone extinct. This might seem like a very small number, 27 out of 7 million. That's great. I mean, we shouldn't be worried about that. But you know what? For one species to form, it takes thousands and thousands of years. If 27 species are going extinct in just 20 years, that is crazy alarming. Okay, like I told you, we didn't become modern humans overnight. Homo erectus did not give rise to us overnight. There were many species that came in between, and then eventually speciation happened and diversification happened, right? But if the species are going, so many species are going extinct in 20 years, that is really alarming, because to form them, for those species to form, it would have taken thousands of years. All right. Now, it's not like all the species, all the taxonomic groups are equally threatened to go extinct. Some species are found to be more vulnerable than the others. If you consider vertebrates, amphibians are more vulnerable to extinction. If you consider plants, gymnosperms are more vulnerable to extinction. See, according to this data, currently 12% of all birds described are facing the threat to extinction, 23% of mammals, 32% of amphibians, 31% of gymnosperms. You can see how almost 1/3 of the species of amphibians and gymnosperms are facing a threat to extinction. Overall, worldwide, 15,500 species are facing a threat to extinction. What are the reasons for it? We'll learn that. And also, is it the first time that something like this is happening? Not really. Even in the past, several times mass extinctions have taken place. Mammoths have been wiped out of our planet. Dinosaurs have been wiped out of our planet. It has happened multiple times in the past. But the problem about the current mass extinction that we are facing is it's much, much faster compared to the previous mass extinctions. And the current mass extinction is mostly driven by human activities. What are some of the reasons which are causing organisms to go extinct? We'll learn about that. There are 4 very important reasons. We call that the evil quartet. Quart is 4, right? So the evil quartet gives us 4 reasons for loss of biodiversity or organisms going extinct. The first most important one is habitat loss and fragmentation. What is habitat? I've told you what a habitat is when we discussed organisms and populations. Habitat is the home for an organism. It is a place which an organism lives. For plants and big trees, it is the forest. For certain wild animals, it is the forest. For certain fishes, it is the oceans, right? So that is the habitat. That is the area in which an organism resides. Habitat loss means what? It is losing its house. Okay? If you cut down forests, what will happen? That area is cleared out right now. So whatever organisms that region harbored, it could be plants, it could be animals, they are now left without a home. They are homeless. Plants cut down, gone. Animals cannot find a place to live there. That is habitat loss. They are losing their house. What is habitat fragmentation? Fragmentation is a big landmass breaking into smaller fragments. Okay, why would that happen? Let's consider this is one area. Again, this is happening because of human activities. You know, human population is always increasing, and to accommodate the needs of humans, the greed of humans, forests have to be cut down. Humans want to eat beef. For beef, you have to give food. So for rearing of beefs, you need grasses and other things. So these big forests are cut down and converted into grassland so that you can have food or fodder to feed the cattle for beef. And then for soybean cultivation, large forest areas have been cut down. So what happens if this entire area was first a forest, one single piece of land mass? Let's say over here in this portion, the forest has been cut down to, probably for wood, for timber. Let's say this part has been cut down because they are converting this area into a grassland. Let's say this area they've cut out because over here they want to grow soybeans. Okay, so what happened now? What was once one big whole area is now broken down into 4 different fragments. Now, there are certain animals like tigers which require huge territories to function. Initially, in that large land mass, probably 20 tigers could coexist without much hassle. But now what has happened? Those 20 tigers are forced into one of these 4 areas. Initially, because that was a huge area, they could survive. But right now, within this small area, there are probably 5-6 tigers living amongst each other. You know how tigers are, right? So they will want their territory. They will not want other tigers in their territory. If a tiger from which originally was from this area, let's say entered this area or this area, the tigers that are there in that area from the beginning, they could fight with it and kill it, right? So eventually, because of this fighting and killing each other, the tiger population itself could go down. So that is what happens. It mostly affects animals that require huge territories, and also birds that have migratory habits. And if they ask you which among the 4 reasons is the most important reason that is driving extinction right now, it is habitat loss and fragmentation. Example, tropical rainforests that once covered more than 14% of the Earth's land surface is now less than 6%. Amazon rainforest, which is called the lungs of the planet because they give out so much oxygen because of photosynthesis. They also, millions of species, it harbors, but even this Amazon rainforest is being cut down and cleared out for soybeans cultivation or for conversion of forest into grasslands for raising beef cattle, all of that. Pollution is another major reason. Because of pollution also, habitats are degraded. Whenever habitats are broken down into smaller fragments, due to whatever reasons, mammals and birds that require huge territories and animals with migratory habits, they are severely affected, and as a result, their population will decline and eventually they could go extinct. This is our first reason. What is our second reason? Overexploitation. Humans, see, nature has enough to fulfill our needs, but humans are known to be very greedy. If greed is more, then nature will not be able to support it. As a result, we have to suffer. Biodiversity loss will 100% happen. We are dependent on nature for a lot of things, for food, for shelter and everything. But if your greed exceeds your need, then it is bound to happen. Extinction is bound to happen. Okay? Now, there are some examples of extinctions that have happened because of overexploitation. Passenger pigeon used to be hunted down for its meat. Dodo was hunted for its meat. Steller sea cow for its leather. So they overhunted it for their own needs, which turned into greed. And as a result, we've lost some very, very beautiful animals from our planet. In the last 500 years alone, many species have gone extinct solely because of overexploitation by humans. Currently, many of the marine fishes are also endangered. They are facing a threat to extinction because they are over-harvested. Alright, that is overexploitation. What is the third point? It is alien species invasion. What are aliens? Jadoo. What is alien? Alien generally is thought to be something that doesn't belong to our planet, right? Extraterrestrial organisms like Jadoo in Koi Mil Gaya, Krish, Jadoo, that is alien. We say that is alien because it's extraterrestrial. It does not belong to Earth. It's come from some other planet. So here, with respect to biodiversity, what is an alien species? An alien species is a species that didn't originally belong to that place. Either deliberately or by chance, it has been introduced to a new area. We've learned about this in organisms and populations. I told you the havoc that cactus, prickly pear cactus, created in Australia when it was introduced there from America. Why? What really happened? Whenever an alien species is introduced into a new geographical area, whenever a species is introduced into a new geographical area, it is called the alien species. So it will not have any natural predators there. As a result, it can grow very well. It will grow so well that it will not allow species that were present in that area for several thousands of years to survive. Okay? It's more like, invasion. When we talk about invasion, you know how invaders invaded India. They did not originally belong to India. They came from different parts of the world and they came to India and they were aliens. Like they didn't belong to this region. They came and then they invaded, and when they invaded, people over here, native Indians that were living here for many, many years, their lives were threatened, right? They were not allowed to grow, right? That is what will happen. So whenever these alien species or exotic species also they are called, they are introduced to a new area, they can pose a threat to the native species or the indigenous species that have been existing there from several thousands of years. That is called alien species invasion. Not all alien species do that. Some of these alien species could turn invasive. One very good example for that is, there is this lake called Lake Victoria in East Africa. In this Lake Victoria, a type of fish called Nile perch was introduced. After the introduction of this Nile perch, which is an exotic species, close to about 200 species of cichlid fishes went extinct. 200 species, 200 different species of cichlid fishes went extinct. This was because of alien species invasion. Next, there are many plants that are invasive that we know about. Parthenium, carrot grass, Lantana camara, and even our water hyacinth, which is scientifically called Eichhornia. We call it the terror of Bengal. That is also a very, very invasive species that will not allow native species to thrive. Recently in India, the African catfish Clarias garrieopinus has been introduced for aquaculture purposes. Now this is posing a threat to our native or indigenous catfishes. It's not allowing it to thrive. That is your alien species invasion. Last point is co-extinction. When two species are dependent on each other in an obligate manner, then if one of them goes extinct, the other one also is bound to go extinct. Let's say there's one animal. On this animal, there is a parasite that is obligately associated. If not for this animal, this parasite cannot survive at all. If this animal goes extinct, this parasite also could go extinct. Let's say two organisms are dependent on each other mutually. Okay, there is mutualism between two species. Let's say there is a moth and there is this yucca plant. We've learnt about that, so I'm taking that example. So if the yucca moth goes extinct, the yucca plant also could go extinct because there is no pollinator for it. If the yucca plant goes extinct, the yucca moth could go extinct because it doesn't know where else to lay eggs, right? So sometimes if an organism is dependent on another organism in an obligate manner, like it cannot survive without it, in that case, if that organism goes extinct, the other one also has high chances of going extinct. So both of them could go extinct simultaneously in a very short period of time. Since it's happening almost together, we call it co-extinction. Now, why should we save or conserve biodiversity? There are three arguments that explain it: narrowly utilitarian, broadly utilitarian, and ethical argument. What does the narrowly utilitarian argument say? We get a lot of things from nature, right? We get food, we get fodder, we get fiber, we get timber, we get medicines. There's a whole lot of things that you get from nature which are economically beneficial for you, right? Commercial importance it has, because these products that you get from nature can make you rich, can fetch you money. It is important for us to conserve it, right? That is the narrowly utilitarian argument. Humans derive countless direct economic benefits from nature, like we get food from it, firewood, fiber, construction material, industrial products, medicinal importance. In fact, more than 25% of drugs that are currently sold in the market are derived from plants, which is part of nature. 25,000 species of plants are used in traditional medicine worldwide, like Ayurveda, Chinese traditional medicine. They are used, and you can make money out of it. They are of economic importance. That is why we should conserve them. The second reason is, the second argument is broadly utilitarian argument. The reason here is biodiversity. Because of biodiversity, we get so many services in the ecosystem which are free of cost. Like right now, if we are breathing air, we are taking in oxygen from the air, we are not paying for it. Plants are giving out oxygen for free. We are not paying plants to photosynthesize. We are getting food from plants for free. Like we are not paying plants to perform photosynthesis, right? Imagine how much you would have to pay. You know, if you go to hospitals or some medical facilities and inquire how much is the cost of an oxygen cylinder, you will be flabbergasted because they cost so much. But nature is giving it to us for free. We get to enjoy fruits. We get to enjoy vegetables. All of that is possible because of pollination. Is bee charging any fee for pollination? Without pollination, of course, fruits will not form, right? Naturally, it will not, or it's rare. So for pollination, they're not charging any fees. And imagine on a day when you're feeling very low, you take a walk in the garden or go out and look at some greenery, your mind immediately relaxes. Are the plants charging us money for that? No. Birds singing in the morning, the sound is so soothing. So such things come to you free of cost, right? Nobody pays for such services. Since nature gives you so many such services which are, which you can't put a price tag on, which are like priceless, because of that, because nature is giving you all of these services, it's important for us to save nature. That is the broadly utilitarian argument. The third one is the ethical argument. Now, what is this ethical argument? You and I can't decide what species should be conserved, what species is okay being extinct. based on how useful it is to us. In nature, all organisms are equal. Every organism will have some innate role. It will have some role that it plays in an ecosystem, even if it's not beneficial to you and I. Okay? So it will have some intrinsic value. It will have some contribution to the ecosystem for which we will have to conserve it. Since we are the brainy folks, we are the intelligent species, we have to be the voice for the species who cannot talk, right? As much as we deserve to stay on this earth, every species, regardless of whether it is useful to you or not, should be conserved. It is our moral and ethical duty to make sure that all of these species survive on our planet. That is our ethical argument. Okay? Now, okay, we know why we should conserve biodiversity. Now let's understand how it can be conserved. If you want to conserve biodiversity, there are two approaches that can be taken. One is called in situ conservation, the other is called ex situ conservation. In situ conservation means on-site conservation, which means if you want to save the tiger in its original habitat. In the same site, its natural habitat, if you conserve it, then you call it in situ conservation. If you take the tiger out of its natural habitat forest, lock it up in a zoo, give it all the care that it requires and conserve it, you're taking it out from its natural habitat and conserving it elsewhere, you call it ex situ conservation. It's called off-site conservation. There are several ways in which in situ conservation can be done and also many different ways in which ex situ conservation can be done. Now, let's first explore in situ conservation. You have all of these different types. There's hotspots and there's protected areas. What are hotspots? There are many different regions of the world that are declared as biodiversity hotspots. Initially, 25 such hotspots were declared. Eventually, they added 9 more and currently there are 34 biodiversity hotspots in our world. So what are these hotspots? How do they determine which area can be declared as a hotspot? There are a couple of things we should keep in mind. Firstly, the species richness in that area has to be very, very high. Okay, the number of species in that area should be more, so the biodiversity there should be high. Secondly, in that area, rapid habitat loss should be happening. Like it should be a region where there is a threat for extinction. Thirdly, there should be high level of endemism, which means endemism is when there are species that are confined to a geographical area. Except for that particular area, that species is not found anywhere else on our planet. If it goes extinct from that part of the world, it has gone extinct from the world itself because you don't find it anywhere else. Okay, so wherever there is accelerated habitat loss, wherever there is high species richness, high degree of endemism, such regions are declared as biodiversity hotspots. Okay, India also is a part of 3 biodiversity hotspots. There's this Western Ghats in Sri Lanka is one biodiversity hotspot. Western Ghats of course belongs to India, the Indo-Burma region and even the northeastern part of India where the Himalayas is. All of these are biodiversity hotspots which includes a part of India as well. Apart from that, we have other protected areas like biosphere reserves. We have what is called sacred groves. Sacred groves are large tracts of forests that are venerated by the local community, by the tribal community. They themselves have religious and emotional attachment with that part of the ecosystem, that part of the forest, that they will not allow animals to be hunted or plants to be cut down in those areas. They are called sacred groves. We have many such sacred groves in India. In Meghalaya, you have Khasi and Jaintia hills. In Rajasthan, you have Aravalli hills. And the Western Ghats, which is a part of Maharashtra and Karnataka. And in Madhya Pradesh, you have 3 regions, Sarguja, Chanda and Bastar. In all of these regions, the local communities itself will conserve nature and protect it because they have that religious attachment towards it. Okay? That's about sacred groves. We also have 90 national parks and around 448 wildlife sanctuaries. That's about in situ conservation. Now let's talk about ex situ conservation. Ex situ conservation is off-site conservation. I told you how you take the organism that is threatened, endangered from its natural habitat and conserve it in a different habitat. Okay. in a different region. You take it out of its natural habitat and you conserve it. That is off-site ex situ conservation. Why do we do this? That's because sometimes the population size would have become so small that if you leave it in its natural habitat, you can't control the external factors. You don't know which predator would come and hunt and feed on it. You don't know if it falls sick, it gets some disease, it cannot be treated. You don't know if there is hunting happening there, humans are poaching. You never know. Those are things that are not under your control. But if you strongly want to conserve that species, you give it similar conditions in another region, as similar to its natural habitat as possible. Take care of its health, and give it food, nutritious food, right amount of food at regular intervals. Also arrange captive breeding so that more babies are made and more offspring are made, so that the species continues to survive. You can do all of these things ex situ, right, off-site. So that can be done in terms of zoological parks, wildlife safaris, botanical gardens. Gametes of these endangered species can be cryopreserved in liquid nitrogen at minus 196 degrees Celsius, and even seed banks for endangered and vulnerable seeded plants. You can do all of this. This is ex situ conservation. Okay, so now we know that biodiversity is important, we know why we should conserve it, we know how we can conserve it, but it's not the responsibility of one or two countries where biodiversity is high. It's a global responsibility. Every country in the world has to come together and understand how important biodiversity is, what would happen if we don't conserve it, and come to a conclusion and bring up strategies to make sure that the biodiversity is not lost. Okay, so in that direction itself, many summits have been conducted in the past. In the year 1992, the Earth Summit on Biological Diversity was conducted in Rio de Janeiro. Okay, over here many nations were called to take appropriate measures for conservation of biodiversity. You know, you have to use the benefits of nature, you use the resources of nature, but don't use it so much that it goes extinct. Try and come up with ways to use it sustainably. Okay, that is the thing. And 10 years later, in 2010, the World Summit on Sustainable Development was held in South Africa, Johannesburg. Even over here, 190 countries came and pledged that they are going to support and they will be committed to achieve by the year 2010 a reduction in the current rate of uh, biodiversity loss at the global, regional as well as the local levels. So that's about it. It's important for you to remember these dates and everything also. So with that, we've come to the end of the UMEED NEET English batch botany chapters. I hope this was useful. I'll see you again probably in a marathon or question discussion. Until then, take care of yourself, stay healthy, stay happy, keep studying hard and achieve your dreams, goals, whatever you have for yourself. All the very best. Thank you.